Hey guys, tonight we begin with the scratching. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just that slow, deliberate skittering in the walls. You wake up in a lumpy bed stuffed with straw, which also happens to be rat heaven, apparently. The linen blanket doesn't quite reach your toes, and something brushes against your ankle that most definitely wasn't woven by a nice old lady in the village. Congratulations. You've survived the night, but barely. The rats did too. The morning air is thick with the smell of damp wood, old sweat, and something that's either moldy bread or the end of hope itself. You stretch, bump your elbow on the wattle and daub wall, and wonder whether that faint squeak came from the rafters or your own joints. The answer is yes. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You lie still for a moment longer, listening. A rat scuttles somewhere above your head. Another one knocks over a wooden cup on the corner shelf. You sigh. Your day hasn't even started, and you're already negotiating territory with rodents. In this particular century, let's call it a pre-bleach era, your options are limited. You sit up, brushing crumbs off your tunic, and they aren't yours. They belong to last night's midnight mouse rave. You slept through it somehow, though not without vivid dreams of tiny claws and squealing laughter. Historians still argue whether rats were more active during the day or night in medieval households. But one thing's clear: you never get the place to yourself. The first step out of bed is always risky. The floor is stone in theory, but in practice, it's covered with straw, dust, and what we'll generously call organic matter. You slip your feet into leather slippers, only to pause. Better check them first, because rats love warm hidey holes. You shake them out, and a small beetle drops out. That's a win. Breakfast isn't a feast, it's a transaction with the pantry gods. You grab a chunk of brown bread, hard enough to knock someone out with, and head for the window. Not for the view, but because it's the brightest place in the room and slightly less likely to contain a rat. Slightly. You nibble on the edge of the bread. A crumb falls. Within seconds, a gray blur darts from the shadows. That's Gregory. You named him last week. He's missing part of his tail and has the audacity of a tax collector. You throw a pebble. He stares, blinks, and leaves. Slowly, like a dinner guest who isn't finished monologuing. The rat problem isn't just your problem, it's a village-wide catastrophe. Everyone lives in single-room houses made of materials that double as rodent buffets: wood, straw, clay. You live in a cheese platter with a roof, and there's no plastic bin to seal things in. You store food in sacks, barrels, or jars with wax-sealed lids, assuming the rats haven't already chewed through the top and invited their cousins. People have tried all sorts of tricks. Some hang garlic, some bang pots, some swear by cats, though cats are fickle and might just nap through the invasion. One neighbor even tried painting little demon faces on her door to scare rats away. She now has rats and demons, depending on who you ask. You glance at the wooden beams above you. Chew marks. Again. You start your morning ritual, whispering a tired prayer to Saint Gertrude of Nivelles, patron saint of cats, and, yes, rat infestations. She's busy this century. Very busy. You wander outside into the village lane. where you're greeted by the usual sights: laundry, livestock, children running barefoot, and at least two rats scrambling from the communal dung heap. The dung heap, by the way, is also where the rats hold their strategic meetings. That's where they plan their incursions. Your friend Agnes waves from her porch, swatting at something invisible. "They took my flour again," she says with a smile that's mostly teeth and fury, "right through the sack. Left a trail like it was breadcrumbs to Narnia." You nod, chewing your own bread that now tastes suspiciously of oats, sadness, and rodent betrayal. A rat dashes between your feet. You don't flinch. That was Tuesday energy. This is Thursday. You're stronger now. The village elder passes by and mutters something about rat weather. No one questions what that means, but we all nod. There's an unspoken understanding that the rats know things, that they plan, that they wait. The rats don't just eat food, they chew through clothes, parchment, soap, and one time, Margaret's hat. Historians still debate whether it was due to the straw lining or just a matter of taste. You decide not to leave anything soft out again. By midday, the sun is up, and so are the rats. You'd think they'd stick to the dark, but no. These are bold rats, educated rats, possibly literate. One once ran across a stack of manuscripts in the monastery and left behind what could be interpreted as marginalia. You wander past the tavern and overhear the usual argument. Did the rats cause the sickness last winter, or just show up for the after party? No one knows, but everyone has an opinion. Some blame bad grain, some say curses, others are just mad they lost their socks. But it's not all gloom. There's community and shared struggle. You swap stories, you compare teeth marks, you invent new traps with buckets, string, and dangerous optimism. Someone tries setting up bells that jingle when disturbed. The rats wear them like jewelry. Still, you survive. You eat. You patch holes. You brace the pantry door with a broom handle and a prayer. You accept that the scratching will come again tonight. And tonight, you'll close your eyes and drift to sleep, if you're lucky, before Gregory returns to share your pillow. The thing about breakfast in a rat-plagued village is it's always a shared experience. Not metaphorically, not spiritually, literally. You sit down to eat, and there's already someone at the table. He's furry gray and chewing through the corner of your barley loaf like it's a paid gig. You try not to scream. You've screamed before. It doesn't help. The rat just looks up like, "Excuse me, I was here first." And he's right. You leave your bread overnight, unwrapped, on a shelf carved from questionable pine, and you expect it to not be perforated by dawn? That's on you. Still, you salvage what you can. You cut off the worst parts, which somehow feels worse, and eat the rest. It's stale, rough, and tastes mildly of despair. You sip your thin ale, hoping the bitterness drowns the crunch. But there it is, the unmistakable snap of something that was not baked in. Is it rat tooth? Is it barley husk? Historians still argue whether ancient households routinely ingested bits of rodent debris, or whether that's just what happens when no one invents airtight storage. Either way, you keep chewing because there are chores to do, and if you don't fuel up, you'll collapse by mid-morning. Again, your kitchen, if you can call it that, is a corner of the room with a small hearth, a hanging pot, and several questionable smells. You're not sure what's burning, wood maybe, or the ghost of a rat you tried to chase into the fire last week. There's a basket in the corner that once held apples. It now holds chewed cores, apple skins, and a rat currently making eye contact. You toss a ladle in its direction. It scurries off, but not before dragging half a peel with it. Fair enough, you mutter, suddenly unsure whether you're the landlord or just another tenant. Outside, your neighbor shouts. You rush to your doorway to find her waving a broom and muttering words not approved by the local friar. She's chasing three rats across her vegetable patch. One stops to grab a turnip and takes off again like a thief with a snack. They've got thumbs, I swear it, she bellows. You nod solemnly. You've seen what they can do with a latch. They climb walls. They open loose lids. They have infiltrated everything but your dreams, and you're not entirely sure about that either. You return inside and sit by the fire, trying to salvage the rest of breakfast. The cheese you planned to eat has been gnawed into a sad crescent. There are tiny paw prints in the butter dish. There's a tail-sized smear in the flour. The rats don't just eat your food, they touch it. They desecrate it. You can't even look at the dried figs anymore. Last week, you bit into one and it fought back. You pick up your bowl, check for passengers, and take a reluctant spoonful. Barley porridge thinned with water. Bland, gluey, and potentially compromised. But what's the alternative? Starve? Go to the tavern and pay for rat-free food? As if that exists. You think about that time. The innkeeper swore his cellar was clean. Then a rat ran across the bar mid-sentence, carrying a pickled egg. The worst part isn't the rats you see, it's the ones you don't. Because for every Gregory or Turnip Steve that makes a daylight cameo, there are dozens more watching. From the rafters, from under the floor, from the thatch in your roof. You eat quickly. You chew quietly. You try not to make eye contact with the shadows. And you certainly don't leave anything unattended. Not your spoon, not your bread, not even your thoughts. The rats are patient. You once watched one stare at a locked pantry for an hour. It didn't move. It just waited. You're halfway through scraping the last bit of porridge when you hear it. That soft plop from behind the grain sack. The sound of a body landing in flour. You freeze. You tiptoe over, peek around the sack. Two beady eyes meet yours, flour covered and wholly unapologetic. The rat sneezes, shakes off a puff, and continues whatever devious plan it was hatching. You leave the kitchen. You don't have the energy. Instead, you retreat to the washing basin to clean the breakfast dishes. The soap is lye-based and barely masks the smell of rodent urine. The wooden bowl you used has a new scratch on the bottom, right where a rat likely chewed a notch mid-feast. It's now a pattern. Decorative, you say to yourself, as if that makes it better. You glance toward the loft, where you keep your spare grain. You've nailed it shut, trapped it in barrels, sealed the seams with wax. The rats found a way in anyway. Last harvest, you lost half a sack to a nest. You opened the lid and screamed so loud the cows stopped chewing. Now, you keep the grain above the fire to let the smoke rise into the wood, in the hope it offends their tiny noses. They don't care. They have no shame. Some say you should bless your food with holy water. Others sprinkle ash around the shelves, claiming rats hate the taste. You've tried both. The rats now avoid holy water, but only because they prefer the ale. The sun rises higher. Your chores beckon, but breakfast, what there was of it, is done. You sit back and sigh. It was, by all accounts, successful. You consumed more food than you lost. You didn't scream into your spoon. You didn't lock eyes with a rat and feel judged. You call that a win. Just as you're about to stand, a scratching sound echoes from the rafters above. You slowly look up. 3 rats, perched on a beam, staring down like critics at a bad play. One of them drops something. You flinch. It's a breadcrumb. You've been reviewed, and apparently, breakfast needs work. By now, the house has settled into its usual midday rhythm, warm, dusty, and suspiciously too quiet. You walk across the uneven floorboards, and there's that smell again. Not the normal smells, which you've come to accept: old onions, damp wool, generational fatigue. No, this is different, earthier, sweeter, and definitely wrong. You pause in the center of the room and sniff. Your nose crinkles. It's coming from under the floor, which would be fine if you didn't know that under the floor in a medieval home isn't a place. It's a dimension, a lawless space inhabited by ghosts, spiders, dropped spoons, and a sprawling rat metropolis, complete with tunnels, feasting halls, and questionable politics. You kneel, lift a loose plank with a rusty knife, and brace yourself. You were right. It's not one rat. It's not even a nest. It's a mausoleum. Turns out, the only thing worse than live rats are the ones that die under your house and decide to haunt you through the medium of smell. You fan the air and gag. Something soft squishes beneath your boot. You don't investigate. Some truths are best left unearthed. You didn't think this part of history involved rat corpses fermenting in the darkness. But here we are. Historians still argue whether medieval homes ever had real insulation or if they were just elaborate rat hotels with walls. Based on the evidence currently rotting beneath your house, you're going with the latter. So what do? Burn the place down? Tempting, but you just rethatched the roof last month, and kindling is hard to come by. You grab a cloth, tie it around your face like a sad, smelly bandit, and get to work. You remove the worst offenders first, those closest to the surface, bloated and unpleasantly squishy. Your tools? A bent fire iron, an old soup ladle, and sheer emotional detachment. Every time you think you're done, another one appears, like a bad subplot in a never-ending saga. Of course, none of this is sanitary, but neither is your daily life. Sanitation won't be invented for centuries. You're living in a time where people drink beer because water is actively trying to kill them. So a few rat corpses under the floor barely makes the top 10 of health hazards. Still, the stench is relentless. You toss the remains into a pit near the dung heap and sprinkle herbs around the house like it's an exorcism. Lavender, sage, crushed mint. Doesn't do much. Now it just smells like a dead rat who bathed in a monastery garden. You think of calling the rat catcher, but the last time he came, he charged 2 coppers and left you with more rats than you started with. He swore he'd flush them out. You swear he just shook their hands and left. The rat catcher, by the way, is not a heroic figure. He wears a patched cloak that smells like old bacon and successively poor choices. His tools? A sack, some wire cages, and a stick he claims is enchanted. It's not. You saw him hit his own foot with it last month. He walks with a swagger built entirely on the fact that he is marginally more comfortable with vermin than everyone else. Some call him brave. Others call him unwashed. Both are correct. He says things like, "They respect me," and "You have to think like a rat," which is deeply unsettling because you're starting to suspect he does. He once claimed to have lived with a rat colony for a week to learn their ways. You didn't ask follow-up questions. You just handed him your last coin and hoped for the best. He caught 7 rats and lost 3 in the process. They escaped in your pantry, found a box of figs, and threw a party. You know this because they left the stems stacked like tiny firewood in a single turd on your cutting board, as if to say, thanks for the hospitality. Since then, you've handled things yourself, which means periodically crawling under the house with a torch, whispering threats, and waving garlic around like it's a holy relic. You've sealed up the holes. You've lined the walls with ash. You even tried placing a small wooden statue of St. Cuthbert in the corner. The rats knocked it over and used it as a ramp. You sit back on your stool, cloth still tied to your face, and try to forget the squishy feeling. But the smell lingers. It always does. Later, you talk to your neighbor, Oswin. He swears by cat droppings, says scattering them keeps rats away. You're skeptical, mostly because Oswin's kitchen still sounds like a rodent jazz club after dark. But hey, at this point, you'll try anything. You ask to borrow a scoop. You both pretend this is normal. You return home with your prize, sprinkle it generously near the walls, and wait. Nothing happens. Then you hear a squeak, then another, then laughter. Or maybe that's just in your head. You're not alone. Every villager has their own method. Salt lines, chalk symbols, loud whistling at bedtime. One guy even hired a traveling magician who solemnly waved a wand, shouted, "Begone, ye demons of whisker and claw," and promptly got bit on the ankle. He left that afternoon. The rats stayed. You've considered moving. But where? The next village has rats. The woods have wolves. The monastery has rules. At least here, you know your enemies, and occasionally, they leave you part of your bread in return. You wrap the remaining scraps of food in cloth and hang them from the rafters. It won't stop them, but it will slow them down. You lay fresh straw on the floor and place a few mint leaves beneath your bed. Then you sit, exhale, and try to convince yourself that the smell has faded. It hasn't. But your nose is tired. You stare into the hearth, wondering how many rats are staring back from the shadows. They've seen things. They've eaten things. And now they wait. Under the floorboards, in the cracks of the walls, and yes, even behind your favorite chair. You tell yourself this: tonight, you'll sleep better. But the truth is, the scratching never really stops. Just when you think you've reclaimed your home, cleared the corpses, sealed the holes, negotiated spiritual boundaries with the wall shadows, he arrives. The rat catcher, you don't invite him. He just shows up. Is one of his many talents, along with sneaking, shouting at vermin, and exuding the scent of old meat wrapped in damp leather. He lumbers down the path with his sack slung over one shoulder and a staff twice his height in the other. The stick is adorned with something that might once have been a badger's foot or maybe a very confused carrot. You're not sure. You don't ask. There's a general rule in the village: don't look too closely at the rat catcher's accessories. You may not like what you find. Afternoon, he grunts, eyes scanning your doorframe like he's assessing whether the rats inside are worth his time. You nod back, unsure if this is a greeting or a threat. Without waiting for an invitation, he pushes into your home like it's his second job to invade personal space, which honestly it might be. You step aside and immediately regret it. He smells like last week's stew and something faintly metallic, like rust or regret. A big one's in this house, he says, not even pretending to be polite. Heard it from a dog. You blink. He doesn't elaborate. He squats in the corner, pulls out a cage, and starts muttering. Not spells, just words. Things like, "Oh, you little whispers," and "Come to daddy, you cheese-loving freaks." You'd laugh if you weren't deeply concerned that the rats might actually respond. His toolkit is Impressive isn't the right word. It's a blend of crude traps, bait pouches, iron tongs, a jar of dried beetles, and a live ferret named Elspeth. Elspeth looks like she's seen things, possibly caused things. Her eyes glint in a way that says, I don't follow rules. I am the rules. He releases her with a nod. Go earn your supper. She darts into a crack in the floor like a furry missile of vengeance. You hear immediate chaos, skittering, squeaks, a thud. You raise your eyebrows. He smiles. 3 teeth. The trick, he says, is to keep him surprised. Rats don't like surprises. Then he tosses a tiny bone into the fireplace for reasons you hope are spiritual and not nutritional. Historians still debate whether rat catchers were official tradesmen or just glorified vagabonds with pet rodents and an unshakable self confidence. You're leaning toward the latter. As he works, he tells stories. That's part of the deal. You don't just hire a rat catcher, you host a one man theatrical production of The Rats I've Known and the Wounds They Gave Me. He once caught a rat the size of a small dog. Another had 2 heads. One he claims could mimic human speech. Called me a twit, he mutters. Cheeky side. You nod respectfully. It seems like the right move. He sets traps. Wooden snap traps, wire nooses, a glass jar balanced on a stick with a bit of salted pork. Elspeth returns, panting and smug, dragging a half-eaten tail behind her. He rewards her with a beetle. You try not to gag. Then comes the singing. It's not good. It's a rhythmic chant of, Ratty, ratty, come out fast, lest I burn your bum to ash, accompanied by tapping on the floorboards and the occasional aggressive stomp. You think it might be a spell, or a threat, or both. He pauses, turns to you, and says, They like rhythm. Makes them nervous. You don't question it. You just nod again and slowly slide your bowl of stew a little farther away from him. Eventually, the rat catcher produces his piece de resistance, a wooden whistle carved with strange symbols. He blows it once. Nothing happens. Then twice. Then you hear it. The faintest rustling, a paw scratching the wall, a tail dragging across a beam. The rats are listening. One pokes its head out. It's Gregory. He freezes. You freeze. The rat catcher smiles, lifts his tongs, and wham, Gregory is no more. You gasp, not out of horror, but respect. You've known Gregory for weeks. You were beginning to think he was immortal. The rat catcher tosses the corpse into his sack, which already squelches disturbingly with each addition. That's 1 tail, he says. 2 copper. You glance at the sack. It's moving. You really don't want to know why. You reach into your pouch, hand over the coins, and try not to think about where they've been. He stands, dusts off his knees, and gestures around your home. Better. Not good, but better. You say thank you. He nods. Then he picks up his sack, calls for Elspeth, and disappears down the path without another word. Like a smelly breeze of vermin. Themed justice. The house is quiet again. Mostly. A few squeaks here and there, but softer. Less aggressive. Like the rats are holding a memorial service. You sit down, stare at the corner where Gregory once ruled, and eat your stew in silence. 1 rat down, several hundred to go. But for tonight, you share your meal only with your own thoughts, and 1 beetle that probably hitched a ride on Elspeth. You flick it away and smile. Victory is small, squishy, and very temporary, but it's yours. So, now you've met the rat catcher, a man of few teeth and fewer boundaries, and you think, well, that's that. The rats are gone. Oh, sweet summer soul, Because just as you're sitting down to a slightly less rat adjacent lunch, you hear it, the unmistakable yip of a dog, then another, then a thundering crash that rattles your utensils and possibly your bones. You step outside and the chaos greets you like an old friend. Two rat catching dogs, one a wiry terrier with a face like a bar fight, the other a squat mutt built like a potato with legs, are sprinting after a rat the size of a bread loaf. The rat has momentum. The dogs have rage. You unfortunately have front row seats. The chase loops around your neighbor's firewood stack, barrels through a cabbage patch, and ends with a heroic leap by the rat into your laundry line. Yes, your freshly washed tunic now has a new feature, paw prints and a claw tear straight across the armpit. You sigh. That's the fourth this month. Rat catching dogs, it turns out, are more fury than finesse. They're trained, sure, but their idea of precision is to bulldoze through every object between themselves and their target, including fences, pies, small children, and your dignity. And then there are ferrets. You already met Elspeth, of course. Part ninja, part noodle, but she's not the only one. Rat catchers across the land often carry ferrets in sacks, like slinky little sidekicks of doom. Ferrets can wiggle into places even rats avoid: drain pipes, haylofts, old shoe piles. Historians still argue whether ferrets were beloved helpers or chaos incarnate. After watching one eat a pigeon's head and fall asleep in your sock drawer, you lean toward both. You once tried borrowing a ferret. Just one afternoon, you let it loose in the pantry, hopeful. Half an hour later, you found it curled around a rat skull like a smug little pretzel and drooling on your grain bin. It took 2 days to coax it out. You haven't recovered. But the most terrifying rat catching method? Bare hands. Yes, you heard that right. Some of the more robust individuals in your village don't bother with traps or animals. They just see a rat, yell something unintelligible, and lunge. It's horrifying and disturbingly effective. Old Marta, who runs the tannery, once snatched a rat mid-leap and bit it. Bit it. People still talk about it. She's now feared by both rats and tax collectors. You avoid eye contact. The thing is, catching a rat isn't the hard part. It's surviving the aftermath. Because when you catch a rat, you make the others angry, or mournful, or worse, vengeful. You once found a pile of droppings arranged in a suspiciously deliberate circle after killing one. Was it coincidence? Performance art? A warning? No one knows. You start noticing patterns, like how the rats avoid the neighbor's house but always flock to yours, like how they never touch the salted pork but destroy the lentils, like how one of them learned to nudge open the grain bin with its nose. They're evolving. You ask around. It's not just you. Down by the river, a baker claims her entire delivery cart was ransacked by what she described as a coordinated assault. They bypassed the moldy bread entirely and made off with her apple tarts, left behind a single plum pit and a boot print. Small, possibly rodent, possibly sarcastic. And then there's the priest. He swears one rat entered the church, took communion, wafer crumbs, and left with an air of smug forgiveness. That rat has not been seen since, but rumors say it lives in the belfry now and only comes down during confessions. At some point, you start sympathizing. Rats are everywhere, always watching, always surviving. You see one squeeze under a door, barely wider than a quill. Another scampers across the roof beam, pauses to stare at you, then cleans its face. You feel seen, judged even. You decide to take a more active role. You build a trap. It's a work of questionable engineering, bucket, stick, string, piece of onion, but you feel proud. You test it. It collapses onto your own foot 3 times. You adjust. Add more string. Shorten the stick. Replace the onion with cheese. Then replace the cheese with bread crusts because you remembered rats here aren't French. You wait. Night falls. The trap remains untouched. You find it the next morning, upended, bait missing, and a single rat dropping, placed neatly on the release lever. You have been mocked. You start to understand why some turn to poison. Crushed glass mixed with meat, mercury powder, dried nightshade. But then you remember how your cousin tried that and accidentally poisoned the cat and the cow and his own left foot somehow. He limps now, and the rats still visit, so you return to the old ways. Dogs, traps, yelling into corners. You begin making mental maps of their routes. Under the table leg, behind the cauldron, up the chimney. You become a cartographer of rodent rage. You try making peace. One night, you leave a bit of bread near their hole. Not poisoned, just generous. In the morning, it's gone. In its place, a small stone, smooth, shiny, almost like a gift. You hold it for a long moment and decide not to question it. Perhaps the rats are telling you something, or perhaps they just dropped it. Still, it's a nicer offering than your neighbor gave you last solstice. You wake up the next morning to a loud clang, not the sound of a rat falling into your clever homemade trap. No, that remains stubbornly untouched, save for a new smudge that looks like it was licked in defiance. This sound is something else. Metal on wood, sharp and decisive. You rush outside to find Oswin, your neighbor with exactly 3 teeth and 6 conspiracy theories, standing over a bucket full of dead rats. Poison, he declares proudly. New recipe. Works faster than a priest at a wedding buffet. You raise an eyebrow. What's in it? He leans in, whispering like he's sharing the royal tax code. Crushed glass. Bit of lard and powdered belladonna. He grins. One of his teeth falls out mid-sentence. You nod slowly and back away. Because this, is what history calls solutions that created more problems. Poisoning rats isn't a new idea. It's an ancient gamble. The Roman Empire had versions. So did medieval apothecaries. They crushed dried herbs like hemlock and hellebore into bitter balls of death. Others used arsenic, sulfur, and occasionally just straight up rotting meat laced with urine. The goal: kill the rat before it killed you or your pantry. Historians still argue whether these poisons were more effective than simply yelling at the rats and waving a broom. Based on the trail of purple-tinged dead chickens outside Oswin's yard, you're guessing the collateral damage was substantial. But poisons weren't the only weapons. There were traps. Ingenious ones, if by ingenious you mean lethal wooden seesaws of doom. Snap traps existed long before the industrial age. A block of wood, a bit of bait, a springy piece of metal, or if you're broke, a very irate stick. Some people use glue traps. Well, resin traps, technically. Thick tree sap spread onto wood planks and baited with a smear of fish paste. You tried it once, caught a boot, your boot. It's still there. And then there were the alchemists. You know the type. Old, wiry, always mumbling into jars, convinced that the solution to vermin lies in the stars. One claimed rats hated copper. Another swore by vinegar mixed with ashes. A third offered to bind the rat's spirit to a goose for 2 silver coins and a firm handshake. You bought a jar of ratbane elixir once. The label promised guaranteed repulsion of vermin and also spousal disputes. It smelled like burnt licorice and lies. You poured it around the edges of the pantry. That night, the rats held a concert. One played a lute. You're still not sure how. Then you hear about the smoke method. A man down the road swears he drove an entire rat colony out of his root cellar by lighting bundles of herbs and sealing the exits. You decide to try it. You prepare bundles of rosemary, sage, and thyme because if you're going to gas out pests, might as well make it smell like a medieval roast chicken. You light the herbs. Smoke fills the room. You cough. The rats don't. In fact, one of them emerges, sits on a beam above you, and fans itself with a leaf. You take that personally. Desperate, you consult the old village manuscript, Remedies and Recipes of Mild Peril. There's a section titled Concerning Rodents and Other Nighttime Goblins. One passage suggests making a circle of chalk and chanting, "Come not, bite not, steal not, gnaw not." Another recommends burying a rat skull at the crossroads and whispering your family's secrets into it. You try both. The rats seem unimpressed. One of them leaves you a chewed up button on the windowsill. You think it might be a pity offering, your final attempt. A potion from Widow Brindle, the local herbalist and casual menace. She gives you a packet of dried roots and something that looks suspiciously like toenail shavings. Brew this at midnight, she rasps, and sprinkle it under your bed. The rats will flee, or you will. Either way, peace. You follow instructions, boil the contents, and endure a stench that can only be described as old cheese in emotional crisis. You sprinkle it carefully around the room, whispering the prescribed phrase, "Begone, ye furred phantoms of hunger and pestilence." That night you sleep soundly, too soundly. You wake up to an ominous stillness. No scratching, no squeaking, no Gregory. You rise cautiously and inspect the pantry. Everything is untouched. The bread is whole. The grain sack unmolested. Even the butter is smooth, unpawed. You're suspicious. You search the house. Nothing. No rats. No signs. You finally look under the bed and find 5 rats, all asleep, piled together like a warm, twitchy blanket. They've moved in. Apparently the potion worked, but not the way you hoped. You've created a sanctuary, a rat haven, a spa perhaps. They're not just tolerating your presence, they're thriving in it. One of them snores. You close your eyes, breathe in, and accept your fate. From now on, your house is not yours. It is shared. A commune, if you will. You live with them. They live with you. They leave you offerings. You try not to step on their tails. It's not poison. It's not war. It's cohabitation. And the weirdest part, you kind of sleep better. You didn't plan on getting into the economics of rat catching, but here you are, clutching a broom like it's a holy relic and pondering supply chains, because it turns out where there are rats, there's coin, and where there's coin, there's corruption, especially when your local rat catcher gets paid by the tail. Yes, per tail, which sounds like a logical system until you realize it incentivizes the rat catcher not to exterminate rats, but to maintain them. Like a grotesque, squeaky livestock business. You learn this the hard way when one evening you find a cage behind your shed. Inside, 14 very alive, very smug rats, and a small tag that says, "Property of Wulfric the Catcher. Do not relocate." You blink at the rats. One of them waves. Probably. You storm down to Wulfric's wagon, where he's counting coppers and sipping something that smells like feet and fennel. What's the meaning of this? You ask, holding up the tag. He shrugs. It's just storage. Don't worry. They're premium. Clean, strong tails. I raised them on barley and leftover bacon grease. Nothing but the best. You gape. You're breeding them? Reinvesting, he corrects. Smart business. Can't catch rats if they're all dead, can I? Historians still debate how widespread this practice was, but in villages like yours, where rats never seemed to vanish completely, well, let's say the math didn't always add up. You remember last winter, when Wulfric claimed to catch 37 rats in a single day, and yet your walls still scratched at night like they were hosting a rodent poetry slam. You realize now it's a closed loop. The rat catcher breeds rats, releases them strategically, then catches just enough to keep people grateful. It's pest control meets theater. You confront him. He leans in, breath pungent with pickled turnips. Look, people need a villain, and they need a hero. I provide both. You retreat, equal parts furious and impressed. Honestly, if rats had a guild, he'd be their president. Back home, you ponder your options. Do you report him to the Lord? Unlikely. The Lord once praised Wulfric for bravery in the face of Squeak. Do you spread rumors? No need. Wulfric does that himself. Claims to have fought a rat the size of a turkey, with eyes like betrayal, so you turn to the underground. Literally. There's a boy in the village, Finn. Thin as a twig and twice as clever. He works in the kitchens, but spends his nights trapping rats for copper pieces. He shows you his traps. Simple, elegant, honest. You don't need poisons or spells, Finn says, baiting a wooden box with smoked eel. Just patience and a rat's respect. They're clever, not evil. You watch him set a trap, catch a rat, and release it outside the village. Not all of them need to die, he says with a shrug. Just move along. You nod, unsure whether he's a future saint or a future mayor. Possibly both. Inspired, you start trapping rats on your own terms. No payments, no business model. Just you, some string, a few wedges of bread, and the occasional peanut. Very exotic, very expensive, very effective. And then something odd happens. The rats change. They're still around, but quieter, less chaotic. One of them starts leaving things. A bead, a shiny pebble, once even a tiny carved figure that looks like a sheep with an attitude problem. It's not just you. Agnes down the lane says her rats have stopped chewing through her boots. Oswin reports fewer droppings. Even Widow Brindle admits, grudgingly, that her roof sounds less haunted. The village adjusts. You hold a meeting. People bring rat tails and old wine. Wulfric crashes it, of course, with a rat draped over his shoulder like a fashion statement. He claims it's for companionship and morale. The rat licks his ear. Everyone pretends not to notice. You propose a new idea. Pay for results, not tails. Rats, gone. Copper earned. Tails, optional. Wulfric scoffs. Finn nods. The room sides with Finn. Wulfric storms off, muttering something about rat treason. You quietly hope he finds a new hobby. Like soap. With Wulfric's monopoly fading, people get creative. They build cleaner storage, raise more cats, with mixed results, and even designate a rat-free food shed guarded by a rooster named Barry, who pecks indiscriminately at everything. Your village isn't rat-free. That would be too much to ask. But it's balanced. You still hear them some nights, scratching faintly, rearranging their lives behind the walls. And you don't mind, because you've stopped thinking of them as pests, and started thinking of them as neighbors. Very small, hairy, frequently rude neighbors. But neighbors, nonetheless. It begins, as many things do in your village, with shouting and spilled ale. You're at the tavern, nursing something that might be beer or might be disappointment in a mug, when the door bursts open. Rat pit, someone yells. You groan. Not because you don't know what that means, but because you do. It's Friday, apparently, and that means public entertainment involving rodents, screaming, and at least one man losing a boot. Rat pits are what happen when humans decide that extermination isn't enough. We must spectacularize it, turn it into sport. A blood soaked, hay covered circus starring rats and dogs and drunk townsfolk who shout things like, "Get him," "Buttons," and "That one owes me rent." You follow the noise to the town square. At its center, a shallow wooden ring lined with planks, straw, and questionable morality. A man in a hat shaped like a dead fox is collecting coins. Entry fee? 1 copper. Wagers? Optional, but expected. The event? A dozen rats versus one very enthusiastic terrier. You recognize the dog, Buttons. Small, scrappy, eyes like caffeine and vengeance. His handler holds him back, letting him bounce in place like a furry gladiator. Across the pit, the rats huddle, wide-eyed, whiskers twitching like tiny weather vanes. The match begins. Buttons is unleashed. Screams. Cheers. One woman faints. Someone drops a meat pie. A rat flies into the air, lands in the ale bucket, and is immediately declared the winner of something. Though no one's sure what, Buttons gets 3 rats in 60 seconds. The rest scatter. A few burrow under the planks. One makes a dash for freedom, climbs a barrel, and vanishes into the crowd. You suspect it's Gregory's cousin. The family has flair. Rat pits weren't just entertainment. They were business. Betting, bragging, and occasionally blackmail. Remember that time your dog lost to a one-eyed rat named Soup? You heard that insult at a wedding once. The marriage didn't last. Historians still debate the origins of rat baiting. Some say it began in the cities. Others swear it was a rural tradition. What's certain is that by the time you're standing in this muddy square, it's an institution. Like bread markets or mildly cursed wide wells. And it's not limited to dogs. Some pits use ferrets. Some pits use cats. One memorable pit involved a goose named Barnaby and a rat wearing a thimble as armor. It was a draw. The crowd loves it. They cheer, they drink. They forget for a moment that these same rats were gnawing their boots last week. Today, they're opponents. Tomorrow, they're roommates again. You watch as Buttons is lifted high, tail wagging, mouth full of glory and rodent fur. His owner gets 5 copper pieces and a pickled egg. Buttons gets applause and whatever bacteria comes with his prize. After the spectacle, children scamper around the pit trying to catch leftover rats. One girl claims she'll keep hers as a pet. Another names hers Sir Chompsalot. A boy ties a string to his and calls it a chariot. You begin to suspect the rats are adapting. That night, you return home and hear something odd. A rhythmic tap, tap, tap beneath the floor. Like practice. Like rehearsal. You imagine tiny rats sparring in the dark, perfecting their dodges, sharpening their teeth, rehearsing entrance music. You try to sleep. But the dreams come. You're in the ring, holding a broom. The crowd cheers. Opposite you stands a rat the size of a pumpkin, wearing Buttons' collar and glaring like you insulted his grandmother. You wake in a sweat. You consider attending fewer public events. Still, Not all rat shows are about carnage. Some enterprising folk turn rat catching into performance art. You once saw a man play a flute and lead 6 rats across the village square. He wore a robe, sandals, and the air of someone who fully believed he was not technically breaking the laws of nature. He called himself the Piper. Not a piper, the Piper. He had trained his rats to climb ropes, balance on his shoulders, even bow. You clapped, mostly out of shock, but there was beauty in it. A strange, quiet understanding between man and vermin. He claimed to never harm them, claimed he once saved a rat from drowning, and it repaid him with loyalty. Also fleas. You offered him a coin. He refused. Respect is payment, he said, bowing deeply before disappearing into the dusk. You never saw him again. But you do start noticing that the rats seem different, smarter, more coordinated, less interested in biting your toes, and more curious about your bedtime reading choices. One even watches you write. You stare at it. It stares back. You both blink. You name it Mildred and leave it a crust. Not all battles are worth fighting, and some relationships, no matter how unusual, are better off forged in crumbs and quiet company. You never thought it would come to this. You, a respected citizen of average hygiene and below average luck, find yourself crawling under the bed with a lantern and a piece of salted fish, whispering sweet nothings into the shadows. Because today you got a cat, or at least you thought you got a cat. It was a gift from Agnes, who said, "He's a killer, this one. Took out 6 mice and my husband's slippers in one night." You were thrilled. You brought him home, named him Sir Whiskerford of Cheeseholm, and introduced him to the pantry, like a knight surveying his kingdom. He blinked once, then promptly went to sleep on your bread. You nudged him gently. "Time to earn your keep," you whispered. He stretched, yawned, rolled over, and knocked over the entire jar of dried peas. That was 3 hours ago. Now he's somewhere in the thatch roof, possibly composing poetry, while the rats reclaim the pantry like it's Normandy. Cats, it turns out, are unpredictable allies. Some are fierce, focused, rodent-killing machines. Others are philosophical loafs with fur and a firm belief in napping through every crisis. Sir Whiskerford, tragically, is the latter. You try encouraging him. You bring him to the baseboards. You point at a particularly insolent rat. He stares. The rat stares. Then, in a moment of betrayal that burns deep in your soul, the rat grooms Whiskerford's ear. They are friends. You are the outsider. Historians still argue whether medieval cats were primarily for rodent control or simply tolerated as furry decor. Based on current events in your home, you're leaning toward decor, possibly divine punishment. You try bribery. You offer Whiskerford fresh fish, cream, even your best pillow. He accepts all of it and still refuses to lift a single paw against the rodent insurgency. You begin to wonder if he's part of their guild. Then there's the other issue. He doesn't just avoid rats, he brings gifts. So far, he's deposited on your sleeping mat a dead pigeon, a live lizard, 3 beetles arranged like a triangle, and one perfectly clean sock that you're certain isn't yours. Every morning is a surprise. Every surprise makes you scream. You speak with Oswin, who proudly declares that his cat once killed a rat and dragged it up a tree to display for the gods. You try not to be jealous. You try harder not to ask how he knows what the gods want. Agnes, ever supportive, says, "Some cats take time. Others just supervise." You look at Whiskerford. He's on your table, licking the butter, supervising. You try a different approach. Introduce a rival. You bring in another cat. This one's from the docks, mean, lean, and missing part of an ear. You name her Claudia. She hisses at Whiskerford. Whiskerford blinks once, yawns, and goes back to licking a wall for no apparent reason. Claudia, on the other hand, gets to work. She's fast, focused. Within minutes, she's cornered a rat, boxed it with both paws, and sent it squealing into the broom cupboard. You cheer. She hisses again, at you this time, and claims the warmest spot by the hearth. Your house is now divided. Whiskerford rules the soft furnishings. Claudia rules the underworld. And you're a servant in your own home, treading carefully to avoid diplomatic incidents. But the rat situation does improve. You find fewer droppings. Your bread survives the night. You even catch sight of Gregory, or perhaps his ghost, scurrying down the lane toward Oswin's house. Victory? Maybe. Then the true betrayal arrives. Claudia brings you a dead rat. You praise her, scratch her head. The next day, Whiskerford brings you a mouse, a stuffed mouse, made of cloth, from your own shirt. It's not just sabotage, it's performance art. You accept it, of course. You're learning that dignity is negotiable. You thank him, put the cloth mouse on the windowsill, and pretend your life is still normal. That evening, as the sun dips behind the trees and the shadows lengthen across the floor, you see something that makes your heart pause. A rat, standing, on its hind legs, on your table, staring at Whiskerford, who stares back. Neither moves. You wait. Silent. Breath held. Then the rat nods and leaves. Whiskerford blinks, rolls over, and falls asleep in your stew bowl. You sit there for a long time, unsure whether you've just witnessed a truce, a declaration of war, or a very strange form of interspecies diplomacy. Either way, you don't interfere, because in a house divided by fur, fang, and mutual disdain, your only job is survival. And sometimes, survival means accepting that your cat may be a poet, not a predator. You wake up to chewing, not outside, not in the walls, not even under the bed, inside your tunic. You freeze. There's a distinct nibble nibble scritch happening somewhere between your armpit and your rib cage. And you can tell, with a kind of primal certainty that comes from living too long in medieval architecture, that something is in there with you. You leap up like your mattress is on fire, which, to be fair, it almost was last week when a candle tipped during rat interception. Protocol number 3. You shake out your shirt violently, arms flailing like a maypole dancer having a breakdown. A rat hits the floor with a wet plop, looks up at you with sleepy irritation, and trots under the bed. You are deeply viscerally offended, because this isn't the first time, and probably not the last. The rats, you now realize, have become brazen. They no longer just sneak through the floorboards or hide in barrels. No. Now they're in your clothes, your walls, your dreams. And the worst part? You're starting to understand them. Historians still argue whether medieval rats were more aggressive due to overcrowding, or if humans were just particularly chewy in the pre-soap era. All you know is that at some point, the line between my shirt and their habitat got real blurry. You examine your clothing inventory. It's not good. Your best tunic has a neat row of bite holes down the hem, as if used for target practice. Your second best tunic has a family of moths living in the sleeve. You reach for your third tunic, once beige, now a suspicious shade of cheese, and discover a sleeping rat curled inside. You let him sleep. He looks peaceful. You settle for a patchwork coat that smells vaguely of pickled onions and anxiety. It's stiff from overwashing and layered with mismatched fabric, much of it scavenged from clothes too far gone to mend. Medieval fashion is not glamorous, especially when it crunches. Later that morning, you go to the market to trade eggs for thread. You need to patch your cloak. Again. The merchant takes one look and says, "Rats?" You nod. She nods back, then hands you a bonus spool, whispering, "For the hidden ones." You don't ask what she means. You just nod again. That's the local language. Vague empathy and thread-based bartering. Back home, you pull on your boots. You pause. You know better now. You tilt them upside down. One has straw in it. The other has a small rat turd and something that used to be an insect, possibly several insects, fused together through trauma. You sigh and clean it out with a stick, boots on, dignity at medium low. You step outside. There's a rat on your roof, just sitting there, like a gargoyle, judging your posture. You walk past Oswin's place. He's hanging socks on a line and muttering, "They chewed the left ones again. Never the right." He eyes you suspiciously. Think they're trying to send a message. You nod. You've seen weirder. You hear stories. Agnes once found a rat curled inside her bonnet, wearing it like a crown. One boy claims the rats rearranged his marbles in alphabetical order. He can't read, but he's convinced. Another man, a shepherd, swears that a rat guided his lost sheep home by whistling from the hedgerows. He was definitely drunk, possibly hallucinating. But still, interesting theory. And you start to find little offerings, not just shiny rocks or buttons, but fabric, scraps of linen, bits of lace, a strip of wool rolled like a scroll, left near your sewing kit, as if in apology. You blink at them, then blink at the shadows. Is this an attempt at peace? Is Gregory, assuming he lives, and let's be honest, he definitely lives, trying to patch things up? Literally, you accept the gifts. It's hard to stay angry when someone leaves you matching thread. You even use the blue linen to fix your sleeve. It holds. That night, you dream of sewing beside a rat wearing spectacles and a tiny vest. You wake up and wonder if you've crossed some line, like Stockholm Syndrome, but with more squeaking. But the damage continues. Every week, you discover new holes. In the tablecloth, in your blanket, in the actual door frame. You patch what you can, using more thread, cloth, and sheer determination. You try vinegar. You try chalk lines. You try hanging noisy bells from your cloak. The rats aren't deterred. They treat the bells like a soundtrack. Still, life goes on. You start getting creative. You sew secret pockets into your tunic, places rats can't reach. You line your boots with mint leaves. You use hardened wax to seal seams. You develop a way of folding your socks that confuses even the boldest rat. You become a walking fortress of half-decent tailoring. And yet, one night, just as you begin to drift to sleep, you feel it again. The faintest tug at the hem of your nightshirt. You hold your breath. Then slowly, gently, you reach down and pull the edge toward you. And staring back, eyes round, whiskers twitching, is a single rat, curled in the fabric like a hammock. You both freeze. You could scream. You could flick him across the room. You could swear vengeance. Instead, you sigh. "Tired, huh?" you mutter. He blinks. You fall asleep. You don't know who wins anymore, but you do know that your clothes are now shared property. And you hope, at the very least, that they're warm. You lie in the dark, staring at the ceiling. Outside, the village has gone quiet. The chickens are tucked in. The dogs are curled up. The tavern has gone from rowdy to snoring. Even Oswin has stopped pacing and whispering about sock conspiracies. But inside your house, it's just getting started. Scratch, 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 thump. The night shift has clocked in. You close your eyes and try to breathe. Just breathe. Maybe it was the wind. Maybe it was the house settling. Maybe thump, thump, thump. Maybe it's a full blown rat parade overhead. You sit up. Something scuttles across the beam above your head, and another, something answers it from the cupboard. Then comes the pitter patter, the squeak, the unmistakable sound of a rat wrestling with your spoon. They have found the spoon drawer, and they are organizing. By now, you know the sounds: the rapid feet on the thatch, the single defiant splat as one misjudges a jump and lands in your wash basin, the strange slow drag that either means a rat is moving a chunk of bread or dragging one of their fallen brethren to a respectful burial behind the wall. Historians still argue whether medieval rats were more nocturnal than modern ones, but if your ceiling is any indication, these rats prefer to party after sundown, ideally between the hours of 11 p.m. and your last shred of sanity. You get up groaning. Your nightshirt, you notice, has a fresh tear near the collar. You don't ask questions. You reach for the broom and pause because the sounds have stopped. That's worse, much worse. You stand perfectly still, broom in hand, eyes sweeping the shadows. Then, click, the door to your pantry creaks open. You didn't open it. You take one step closer. The air smells wrong, like stale oats and judgment. You peek inside. They're having a feast. 6 rats, gathered around a spilled jar of lentils, like little monks around a sacred relic. One of them is holding a bit of cheese. Another is chewing rhythmically, head tilted in something suspiciously like gratitude. You stare. They stare back. You shut the door quietly, retreat, sit on your stool, and wonder if you've just interrupted a religious ceremony. You consider your options. Bang pots, release Claudia, throw a turnip and hope for the best. You go with option 1. You crash a pan against the wall and shout, "No more lentils." There's a moment of silence. Then a soft plop as a single lentil is gently dropped onto the floor from behind the cupboard. A peace offering? A taunt? You're not sure anymore. You slump against the table and sigh. And then, of course, comes the scratching in the walls. The scratching is always there. Daytime rats are annoying. Nighttime rats are strategic. They wait, they plan, they learn. You once filled a hole with clay and vinegar paste. The next night, you found the clay removed and replaced with a pebble and a very passive-aggressive walnut. You tried noise traps. You tied bells to everything. They brought you the bells on a string, woven into a bracelet. You now wear it, for luck. One night, you heard something behind the oven. You peeked. It was a rat using a dry quill to poke at a bag of flour, like a scientist at work. When it saw you, it dropped the quill and ran, but not before turning over the bag, spilling flour into a perfect rat-sized path toward the door. You still don't know how to feel about that. Sleep is a memory. Your dreams are odd. You dream of rat courts, rat orchestras, rat wedding feasts beneath your floorboards. You wake up convinced you're being judged for your seasoning choices. You've taken to sleeping with one eye open and one slipper off, just in case. Last week, you woke to find a single raisin placed delicately on your forehead. There were no raisins in the house. You don't tell anyone. They wouldn't believe you. You light a candle and sit at the table. The scratching continues. So do you. You patch your sleeve. You read a bit of a tattered herbal manual. You hum softly. Eventually, you hear the tiniest squeak near the hearth. You glance over. Whiskerford is asleep, of course, on your clean laundry. But beside him, not 2 feet away, a rat is sitting, watching the flame. Calm. Still. Almost contemplative. You blink. It doesn't move. It just stays there, like it's listening to the fire. Like it too can't sleep. You don't chase it away. Instead, you put a piece of crust on the floor and return to your seat. There's no war tonight, just mutual insomnia and a very strange understanding. The scratching doesn't bother you anymore. Not really. At this point, it's more like a lullaby, a gentle reminder that somewhere behind the walls, a rat is doing rat things, scraping at plaster, organizing crumbs, possibly hosting a community theater rehearsal of Les Miserables. You sip your morning ale because water is still mostly theoretical, and you think about how far you've come. Once, you were just a villager with a broom, a dream, and a pantry full of holes. Now, you're a reluctant expert in vermin psychology, a part time tailor, part time diplomat, full time chew toy. And yet, you're oddly calm because now it's not just you. The whole village has entered a new phase, rat enlightenment. It began when Agnes held a town meeting. She just discovered her ledger, the one she kept under a floorboard, shredded into ribbons. They've read the inventory, she muttered. They know our weaknesses. Oswin chimed in. I caught one staring at my pie recipe, just watching. From that moment, things changed. You stopped calling it an infestation. You started calling it an arrangement. Your neighbor down the lane, the Thatcher with the limp, he started naming them. That's Harold, he says, pointing at a blur near his cabbage crate. And the one missing a paw is Mary. He feeds them grains, talks to them like they're coworkers. And in return, they haven't touched his cheese in weeks. It's a miracle, or extortion. Hard to say. Historians still debate whether rats were ever domesticated in the Middle Ages. But in your village, there's now a fuzzy gray line between pet and pest. You used to trap them. Now you leave notes. Well, not notes exactly, but gestures. You leave out crusts. They return small tokens. A blue bead, a scrap of ribbon, a perfectly unbitten raisin, placed dead center on your table like a chess move. You're not sure who's winning. You see children playing near the barns, pretending to be rats. I'm Gregory, one of them shouts. I'm Queen Mildred, another yells. You pause. You've never said her name aloud. How do they know? You don't ask. You don't want to know. At the tavern, there's now a running joke. Rats don't steal, they redistribute. Everyone laughs, but no one leaves food unattended. That would be suicide. You try to remember when it all shifted. Maybe it was when Buttons the terrier stopped barking at night. Maybe it was when Claudia the cat brought you a rat and then immediately took it back, like a mistake she didn't want to admit. Or maybe it was the night you found the rat stairs. Yes, stairs. Tiny ones, carved into the mud brick behind the hearth. Carefully shaped, rat-sized, leading to a hole you had once tried and failed to plug with mashed turnip. They built infrastructure. And you? You stepped back respectfully and said, fair enough. Since then, they've upgraded. One night, you caught a glimpse of a pulley system using bits of yarn and a spool. Another evening, a rat rolled a grape across the floor using a spoon as a sled. You applaud quietly when they don't see. But then things get weirder. You come home one afternoon and find your cupboard door closed. You're sure you left it open, but now it's latched with a bit of twine and a very tiny knot. You open it slowly. Everything is untouched, arranged even. You stare at the shelves. The bread is upright. The cheese has no bite marks. The sack of beans is rolled and pinned with a pebble. And sitting in the corner, on a bit of straw like a throne, is a rat. He doesn't move. You bow slightly. It feels right. Then close the door. You don't sleep that night. Not from fear, from existential whiplash. Because if the rats are organizing, if they've developed social structures, then you're not dealing with pests anymore. You're sharing space with another civilization. You try to explain this to Agnes. She nods. They're just like us, she says, stirring her stew. They eat. They steal. They hoard shiny things. You look at her shelves. On the top, a coin, a bead, a tiny thimble-sized crown. She doesn't elaborate. You consider telling the priest, but then remember the time he preached about sin and a rat dropped a walnut onto his head mid-sermon. The message was clear. You go home, sit at your table, and realize you're not afraid anymore, not even annoyed. You're impressed. They've won. Not with strength, not with numbers, but with endurance, with cleverness, with sheer, undeniable persistence. And now, they're just part of your world. You write them into your life like they were always here. You step over the squeaky floorboard they favor. You never store bread on the lower shelf. You whistle a rat-friendly tune when you sweep the corners. And in return, they let you be, mostly, except for one sock, which continues to vanish weekly, a small price to pay. It's laundry day, again, which, in your medieval reality, isn't so much a routine chore as it is an emotionally taxing test of endurance, lower back flexibility, and whether your soap survived the last rainstorm. You hoist your clothes onto the line, hoping for a breeze, but expecting damp disappointment. And as you pin up your tunic, your good one, the one that only has 3 visible rat holes, you see it. A nest, not in a tree, not in the eaves, in your laundry basket. Right there, tucked between your undergarments and a potato sack, you've been meaning to turn into something socially acceptable. Tiny shreds of cloth, old hay, and oh no, is that your favorite woolen sock? Yes it is. You sigh and gently nudge the nest aside. Inside, 4 baby rats blink up at you, pink and new, and completely unbothered by your presence. One yawns, another sneezes. Your heart does something it's really not supposed to do when looking at vermin. You're charmed, absolutely, deeply inconveniently charmed. You glance around. No mother rat in sight. You quietly drape part of the sack over the nest and decide to pretend this never happened. But it has, and this is your life now. You once thought you'd defeat the rats. Now, you're protecting their children with your least scratchy fabric. You try to remain logical. They are rodents. They chew things. They carry diseases. Probably. Historians still debate whether the common house rat was the main vector for plague, or if they were unfairly blamed while the fleas did the real damage. You're not sure, but you do know one thing. Your sock is definitely compromised. Still, you carry on. That afternoon, you visit the market to trade cheese and ask casually whether anyone else has found a nest in their laundry. Oswin says no, but he did find a rat attempting to knit. You don't question that sentence. Instead, you head home and find that your second tunic is now missing from the drying line. Stolen? Borrowed? You don't even get angry anymore. You just sit on your porch and sip your soup. Then you see it, a rat, dragging your tunic across the garden with the solemn determination of a pilgrim. It pauses halfway, adjusts the fabric, and continues its mission. You follow at a respectful distance. And that's how you discover it. The rat house, behind your barn, under the old cartwheel, partly built from twigs and mud and your laundry. It's architectural. There are chambers, entrances, an observation deck made from half a butter churn, and draped neatly across the top, your missing tunic. You gasp. Not because it's stolen, because it's well placed. You admire the draping, the fold, the way the embroidery, poor as it is, frames the doorway. They've built a home using your things, and you're not even mad. You find yourself leaning in, looking closer. There's a system. One tunnel smells of garlic. Another is lined with dry lavender. The rats have created a layout that rivals Oswin's hut. And it's beautiful. You back away slowly and make a mental note. Never again throw out scrap cloth. You might be evicting a nursery. Back inside, you sit at your table, pull out your thread and needle, and start patching a new tunic. With extra layers, just in case. But you leave a bit of ribbon near the firewood pile. A gesture. Later, it's gone. And in its place, 3 buttons, a dry berry, and a rock shaped almost like a heart. That night, you light a single candle and whisper to the rafters, "Thank you for the buttons." Not so much the sock. A soft squeak echoes in reply. You go to sleep smiling, because in a world that's cold, chaotic, and occasionally full of rat pits and spiritual ferrets, this this is the closest you've come to peace. A domestic peace treaty sealed with scraps and mutual silence. And honestly, you'll take it. There's a rat in the sugar jar. You discover this fact slowly, first through the faint scratching that echoes off your pantry shelf, then through the unmistakable sound of tiny, unapologetic chewing. By the time you lift the lid and peer inside, the rat has its entire head buried in the sweet crystals, paws outstretched like a diver who just landed in a cloud of dreams. You cough. It does not flinch. Instead, it slowly lifts its head, sugar clinging to its whiskers, and blinks at you like a noble caught mid-scorn. You can't help it. You laugh. The rat blinks again. Then, in a move that should have been rude but somehow feels collaborative, nudges a small sugar lump toward you. You stare at it. An offering? A bribe? A truce? Hard to say. Historians still debate whether medieval villagers had consistent access to sugar. In theory, only the rich and clergy had it regularly. But in practice, your aunt once traded a chicken for a tiny sack of the stuff, and now you've got just enough to make porridge almost tolerable, or at least less like spooning sadness into your face. Now, it's been rat licked. You take the sugar lump anyway. At this point, who are you to reject generosity? You begin to realize something else as you wash out the jar. The rats know what's valuable, not just food, luxury. They never touch the stale barley. They always go for the honey, the soft cloth, the dry figs. They're not surviving anymore. They're curating. It starts to affect how you store things. You elevate the dull grains. You hide the good stuff. You wrap your candied root slices in oilcloth and tuck them in a pot behind the hearth. The rats find them anyway. They leave half. It's polite theft. With boundaries. They seem to understand balance. A nibble here, a bite there, a shared morsel under the cupboard. They never take it all. They leave signs, clean crumbs, arranged pebbles, a small stick drawing of what you assume is a sheep, or possibly a jellyfish. You're not the only one noticing. At the tavern, Agnes tells you she found a rat rolling a grape down her stairs. Not eating it, just rolling it. He looked proud, she said, sipping her ale, like he'd won something. Another villager claims their door was blocked by neatly stacked acorns, as if a rat had tried to pay rent. Still, not everyone is enchanted. Oswin, bitter as ever, insists the rats are plotting something. They're too quiet now, organized, coordinated, like a choir made of fur and teeth. He says this while staring into a tankard full of bread crusts. You're not sure he's wrong. One morning, you find your wash basin rearranged. Not just disturbed, rearranged. The soap is in a dish. The cloth is folded. There's a line of sunflower seeds along the rim. You blink. A rat appears, drags one seed away, then vanishes. You stare at the basin and realize you're no longer being invaded. You're being hosted. Your home is no longer yours alone. It's shared. Subtly, silently, respectfully. if you follow the rules. Don't leave food uncovered. Always lift your boots. Don't move the ribbon in the windowsill. And never ever block the cupboard tunnel. That's Gregory's route. Or so you assume. No one's seen him in days. But his legacy remains. A perfectly gnawed arc in the floorboard. A signature droplet on your storage shelf. A mysterious collection of sewing needles beneath the bed. You used to trap rats. Now you tidy up for them. You even start labeling your jars. Not for yourself, for them. Bread flour, okay to nibble. Pickled eggs, not worth it. Honey, please, only take a bit. And it works. The bites get smaller. The droppings, fewer. The overall vibe? Surprisingly civil. Then, one evening, you find something new, sitting in the center of your kitchen table. A woven ring, made of straw, tiny, delicate, precise. Inside the ring, a thimble, and 3 sugar crystals. You stare at it. It's not just a gift, it's a gesture. Of trust, of gratitude, of barter. You leave out a square of dried pear and a tiny scrap of blue fabric. The next morning it's gone. In its place, a walnut carved with a faint impression of a spiral. You touch it like it might disappear, and you smile. The rats are changing. Or maybe you are. You used to fear the night, the scratching, the unknown. Now you listen. And sometimes you answer. The monastery bell rings twice. You're not especially devout, but the sound usually brings comfort. Today, it brings confusion, because no one's seen Brother Alric since sunrise. And now the scriptorium's windows are open, pages fluttering like panicked butterflies. A curious smell, parchment and ink, and just a hint of rat pee drifts out into the courtyard. You're not the gossiping type, but you do happen to be passing by at exactly the right moment, which is your polite way of saying you are absolutely going to snoop. Inside, it's chaos. Books scattered, scrolls unrolled, like the monks were mid-sermon, and a gust of disrespect blew through. Brother Edwin, the novice with a voice like a wet cloth, is wringing his hands beside a heap of shredded vellum. They ate it, he stammers. You peer down. The wreckage is unmistakable. Chewed Latin script, torn illuminations, a monk's painstaking margin, doodle of a goat, now just 2 hooves and an eyebrow. You whisper, the whole book? He nods solemnly. They left the genealogy section. You blink. Well, of course they did. Even rats have standards. Historians still argue whether rodents actively destroyed history, or if we simply failed to preserve it against a tide of tiny teeth. Either way, the records of your village's barley, harvests from 1261 to 1268, are now snack dust, along with Brother Alric's annotated commentary on Psalms and 3 extremely detailed pages about St. Cuthbert's mysterious rash. You offer condolences, then slowly back away. Outside, you spot a familiar shape. Yes, it's Gregory, not dead, not even slightly remorseful. He's trotting across the garden wall, holding a tiny scrap of parchment in his mouth. On it, a single ink blot, and what may, if you squint, be the beginning of a capital Q. He pauses, looks at you, then vanishes under the chapel eaves. You're beginning to suspect the rats aren't just collecting food anymore. They're collecting knowledge. That night, you check your own books, a tattered herb manual, a half-burned almanac, one pamphlet on unsettling symptoms and what they might mean spiritually. You store them higher, just in case, but the next morning, your notes are reorganized. Not stolen, reordered. Your pressed herbs are labeled. Your illegible scribbles now carry paw print-sized instrument indentations, and your crude drawing of a dream goat has been improved with additional shading. You stare at the page for a long time. Then you hear it, soft rhythmic scratching beneath the floor. Not frantic, not destructive, deliberate, Later that week, Agnes brings news. The church hymnals are missing their last pages, but only the ones in C major. Oswin claims his old alchemy scroll has been taken and replaced with a dead moth and a beetle. Could be a trade, he says, wild eyed. Could be a warning. You consider possibilities. The rats aren't just surviving, they're learning, borrowing, adapting. You start to imagine what they might be doing with the pages. Maps? Rituals? Tiny rat sized universities? You picture a cloaked rat lecturing beneath the floorboards, pointer in paw, as other rats scribble notes on leaf paper and raise their little paws for clarification. You imagine Gregory reading about crop rotations, about music, about you, and you don't know whether to be terrified or proud. One morning, your pantry door won't open. You push. It creaks, resists, then yields. Inside, everything's stacked. Jars labeled with soot, cheese wrapped in cloth. Your oat bin, stirred and smoothed. And there, pinned to the wall with a barley kernel, is a tiny drawing. 3 stick figures. One is a rat, one is a human, and the third is a rat wearing a tiny hat. You keep it. You don't sleep that night. Instead, you listen, not for chewing or chaos, but for rustling, the quiet movement of tiny scholars. You wake up to a single page slid under your door, a recipe for soup. It includes onions, leeks, a dash of vinegar, and one line that reads simply, "No cloves, bad for digestion." You stare at it and laugh, not because it's absurd, because it's correct. You make the soup. It's delicious. You leave a bowl near the floorboards. It disappears by morning. So does your worry. It starts with garlic. You didn't plan it exactly. But after the 4th rat ran across your toes mid-pantry, you reached for the closest thing with a strong smell and tossed it in frustration. Garlic clove. Direct hit. The rat flinched. You blinked. Huh. And thus began your brief and thoroughly underwhelming career as a rat-proofing enthusiast. You string garlic along door frames. You hang it from ceiling beams. You wear a clove on a string around your neck, which makes you smell like an angry stew, but feel empowered. You are not alone. Agnes is hammering iron nails into the corners of her kitchen. They say rats hate iron, she explains, whacking the wood like it owes her rent. Also works for fairies, demons, and in-laws. Oswin has gone full defense mode. He sprinkles crushed mint around his bed, wraps his cupboard handles in nettle rope, claims he saw a rat, turn around in moral disgust after encountering a sprig of rosemary. You try that too. Your house starts to resemble an herb garden run by a paranoid botanist, and for a time it works, at least a little. The scratching eases, the footprints lessen, your bread stays mostly whole. Then one morning, you find a garlic strand braided into a tiny rat-sized wreath and placed on your table. You stare at it. It smells suspiciously festive. You no longer feel in control. Historians still debate whether these traditional rat repellents ever truly worked, or if they just made people feel better about living in buildings built from wood, mud, and misplaced optimism. You try something new. You scream, not out of fear, out of strategy. One night, after hearing a crash in the pantry, you stand up and yell, "I see you, Gregory. I'm not mad, just disappointed." There's a pause. Then the soft scuttling sound of retreat. You repeat this nightly. It becomes a ritual. Brush teeth. Blow out candle. Yell into the darkness. Sometimes you throw in a compliment just to keep things balanced. You have excellent paw-eye coordination, by the way. You think it helps. Other villagers adopt similar methods. Agnes sings lullabies. Oswin recites poetry. The blacksmith's apprentice reads aloud from a book of military strategies, just in case the rats are planning a siege. The rats, in turn, start leaving more gifts: a polished acorn, a carved stick, a single beetle posed like it's doing a little dance. You're not sure if it's art or criticism. Then someone invents the rat whistle. Well, invent is generous. It's a hollow reed that makes a sound like a sleepy duck, but rumor spreads that it clears rats instantly. You try it, you blow. The whistle wheezes, and three rats show up. They sit, they blink, they wait. You put the whistle away, they leave. You feel judged. At this point, you accept the truth. There is no surefire cure, no silver bullet, no combination of cloves, charms, and low level yelling that will banish them for good. They're not infestation, they're residents. So you adjust. You create zones: human pantry, rat pantry. You line your good cloak with cedar bark and accept that your underthings may never be safe again. You begin labeling things not just for yourself, but for them. Oats, shared. Cheese, please ask. Buttons, decorative, not edible. They comply, mostly. One evening, you come home to find your laundry untouched and your soup still warm, and sitting neatly beside your bowl, a rat-sized shoe, hand-stitched, lined with fur. You blink. Then you blink again. You hold it in your palm like something sacred. You don't ask questions. You just leave out a thimble of broth and a few soft breadcrumbs. You go to bed with the faintest smile, because your house isn't haunted anymore. It's shared. And while the garlic didn't drive them off, it made them polite. It's harvest season, which means three things: sore backs, questionable cider, and more grain than any one village can guard with just prayer and a passive aggressive broom. You and the others work dawn to dusk gathering barley, oats, and wheat, piling sacks into storage like overworked squirrels with deadlines. The barns creak under the weight. The air smells like straw and pride. And underneath it all, like an echo in your bones, anxiety. Because if there's one thing rats love more than soft linens and spiritual manuscripts, it's a barn full of food. By the third night, it begins. Scratch, nibble, skitter. You lie in bed, counting how many sacks you stacked versus how many may now resemble Swiss cheese. You try to ignore the soft sound of something rolling across the rafters. In the morning, you inspect the damage. 1 gnawed bag, 2 overturned baskets, a carefully rearranged set of pebbles forming what looks like a pie chart. You don't know how to interpret it. You think it says, "We took 7%. You're welcome." You're not even mad. Historians still argue how much grain loss medieval communities suffered to rats. Estimates range from some to, are we even feeding ourselves or just running a buffet for rodents? You attend an emergency barn meeting. Agnes brings a scroll. Oswin brings a cat. The scroll is blank. The cat is asleep. Someone suggests setting traps. Someone else suggests lighting incense. Someone else suggests asking the rats, nicely, not to eat everything. You suggest rationing. A few sacks left out, clearly marked. This is for you. Please leave the rest. The villagers stare, then slowly nod. It's weird. It's radical. It's possibly deranged. But what do you have to lose? Besides literally all the food, you implement the plan. A few sacks set aside. A chalk mark above the entrance. A sprig of dried mint tied to the post for flair. And, crucially, a note, written in your neatest script, what to our nocturnal neighbors, help yourselves, but kindly refrain from chewing the walls. The first night, you barely sleep. The next morning, you check the barn. The designated sacks? Nibbled, yes, but not destroyed. The other sacks? Untouched. You feel hope. Then you see it, near the entrance. Arranged in a semicircle. 7 pebbles. 2 wheat kernels. 1 bone, clean, and in the center, A perfect circle of oats. A response? A thank you? A declaration of truce? You don't know. You accept it anyway. The other villagers report similar results: fewer chewed shoes, less poop. One rat even dragged away a moldy apple, as if helping clean. A fragile piece forms. You reinforce it with tiny gestures: a cork wedged in a gap, a bundle of dried herbs as a welcome mat, a small, soft whistle, two short notes to let them know you've entered. It's absurd. It's tender. It's working. Then, one evening, disaster. A traveling merchant visits. He leaves his goods in the barn, uncovered, unmarked, vulnerable. By dawn, 3 wheels of cheese are missing, and one of his boots has been converted into what he calls a tiny rodent Airbnb. He is furious. I'll kill them all, he roars. You raise a hand. That might cause complications. Agnes offers a calming tea. Oswin hands him a pie. The merchant storms out, vows to return with poison. The rats get quiet. For days, the barn feels wrong, still, uneasy. You leave out extra grain. A few figs. No reply. Then one night, you wake to a sound, not the usual scratching. This is rhythmic. You creep to the barn, and there, by moonlight, you see it. Rats working, moving spilled oats, restacking tiny grain piles, even dragging a broken clay pot out of the way. And at the center, your missing cheese, half of it anyway, returned. You step back, quiet, stunned. They're not just eating, they're managing. You share what you saw. The village listens. Then they laugh. And then they nod. The new system begins. One corner of the barn, rat zone. One corner, human. Shared tools. Shared silence. And in the middle, a bowl. Sometimes you leave them crusts. Sometimes they leave you feathers. No one talks about it too much. But you all understand. Winter creeps in. Not with drama, but with a quiet shift. The air turns sharper. The ground hardens. Your breath becomes visible in the mornings, floating up like little ghosts of complaints. And the rats, they move in. Not just near the hearth or behind the barrels, in your boots, in your quilts, in the pocket of your second best tunic, which now has a permanent peanut-shaped bulge and a faint scent of cheddar. You try to evict them, gently, respectfully. You clap your hands, stamp your feet, mutter things like, "This is still technically my bed, Mildred, but they're cold. You're cold. And really, what's the harm in a little warmth sharing between species?" You draw the line at pillow usage, but everything else, negotiable, because this winter feels worse. Historians still argue whether the little ice age had hit your region yet, or if this was just a particularly moody December. But either way, the wind howls like a jilted banshee, and your thatch roof now includes a stylish new skylight called the Hole. The village adapts. Houses are insulated with straw and sheep-related optimism. Blankets are doubled. The blacksmith invents something called a bed brazier, which is just a fancy way of saying small pan of fire dangerously close to flammable mattress. And the rats, they become indoor creatures. You find them curled up on windowsills, lined up like furry loaves beneath the oven, tucked into the folds of your cloak like edible buttons. You could scream. You used to scream. But now, you just nod, because they're warm, and warm is rare. One evening, you hear music, not professional, not even good, just a low whistle, a rustling drumbeat, and what sounds suspiciously like Gregory squeaking in rhythm from behind the pantry door. You crack it open. 3 rats, tapping claws, moving to a beat, and one proudly pushing a grain kernel across the floor in time. A dance? A ritual? A coping mechanism? Who knows? You leave them to it. You start seeing more rat furniture, A twig ladder behind your cupboard, a bit of cloth woven into a makeshift hammock. One night, you find a tiny wheel, crafted from a button and some straw, attached to a spinning thimble. You marvel at the craftsmanship. You hang a lantern above their little lounge. They seem to appreciate the ambiance. Winter presses harder. Snow falls. Frost creeps up windows. Your water bucket becomes an ice sculpture. But inside, there's life. You and the rats settle into a rhythm. You share crumbs. They leave lint. You tuck your socks higher. They nibble your candle only halfway. Sometimes you wake to find a rat under the blanket, nose cold, body warm. You sigh. Pull the blanket tighter. One night, you catch Whiskerford and Claudia sitting on opposite ends of the hearth rug. Not fighting, not hissing, just coexisting. In the middle, a rat, washing its face like it belongs. You wonder if the cold has made everyone soft, or sane, or something in between. Outside, Oswin swears he saw a rat riding a chicken. Agnes claims her cat brought in firewood. You don't ask questions anymore. You just sip your broth and thank whatever forces are listening that you're not alone. One stormy night, your roof leaks. A steady plop, plop, plop onto your only dry pillow. You groan. You grab a bucket. You mutter a prayer. Then, in the morning, the leak is plugged with something. You look closer. A wad of thatch, bound with twine, pinned in place with a sliver of bone, engineered by rats. You stare up, lips parting. They fixed your roof. You leave out cheese that night. Good cheese, cheese you were saving. They take it, leave a single clove of garlic in return. You call it even. As the season deepens, your house becomes less house, more ecosystem. You exist within it, among it. Neither master nor victim, just another being trying to stay warm. You whisper bedtime stories aloud. You swear the scratching gets quieter when you speak. You feel less alone, and for the first time you think, maybe this isn't survival. Maybe it's community. You're in the woods, searching for firewood, when you trip over a rock. At least, you think it's a rock, until it blinks. It's a hedgehog, or a potato with opinions. Hard to tell at first glance. You apologize, of course, because you've learned that everything hedgehogs, rats, certain spoons deserves at least basic courtesy in your world now. The hedgehog waddles away. You keep walking, collecting dry sticks, and thinking about how much stranger your life has become since rats started redecorating your house and possibly forming a jazz trio behind your grain sacks. Then you see it, just beyond the thicket, a structure, tiny, hidden, almost invisible from the main path. At first you think it's a bird nest. Then you realize, no, it's a rat structure, a rat village. Little domes woven from grass and twigs, tunnels burrowed beneath logs, a layout, a design, an actual road, if you count a line of compacted moss bordered by acorn shells. You crouch low, silent. It's peaceful. Rats dart here and there, some carrying food, others carrying what appears to be a scrap of ribbon tied like a flag. You spot Gregory. Or maybe Gregory's grand rat. He's older now, wiser, possibly wearing a single bead like a medallion. You watch them for a long time. They don't hide. They don't run. They exist, together, in miniature harmony. Historians still debate the extent of rat social intelligence. But here, now, there's no debate. You're witnessing an organized, thriving community, one that has borrowed your sock lint, your oat dust, and probably one of your spoons to build a world of quiet intention. You smile. And then you step back, quietly, respectfully, because this isn't for you. This is theirs. You return home lighter, wood in your arms, curiosity in your bones. That night, you sit by the fire and think about what it means to live beside something instead of in spite of it. You think about all the lines you used to draw, Clean versus dirty, human versus pest, yours versus theirs. Those lines have blurred, or maybe they were never real. You remember the early days, yelling at shadows, stuffing herbs into every crack, weeping over stolen biscuits? And now you leave out scraps and receive buttons in return. Now you patch holes and find them reinforced the next morning. Now you whisper into the dark and the scratching quiets like someone's listening. You've become part of a system, not in control, not subjugated, part. You once feared the rats would take over. They didn't. They invited you in. You light a candle and walk to your pantry. There, you leave a single chestnut, unchewed, wrapped in a bit of cloth. A gift. You're not sure why. Gratitude? Recognition? Or maybe just a habit now. You go to bed, and that night you dream. You're walking down the moss road again, but this time, you're rat-sized. You pass a rat smithy, a rat market, a tiny choir singing in soft squeaks. You see yourself reflected in a puddle, and you're smiling, not afraid, not confused, just home. You wake up slowly, peacefully, and beside your bed you find a new item, a spool of thread, unwound, arranged in the shape of a circle, a ring, a symbol. You nod. You understand. The rats are no longer your problem. They're your neighbors. And you, yes, even you, have found your place among them. Morning comes quietly. No dramatic rooster. No cask collapsing in the square. Just a soft sunbeam sneaking past your curtain and falling across a floor that hasn't been chewed in 3 days. That might be a record. You rise, stretch, and listen. Nothing. Not silence exactly, but balance. A rustle in the wall. A tap from the cupboard. The faintest squeak near the firewood, but not panic-inducing, just conversational. Like someone's politely requesting the oat scoop. You pad across the room, retrieve your boots, only mildly nod, and start your day. You don't even flinch when a rat scurries past your foot. You wave. The rat nods back. You used to believe the war was eternal, that it was humans versus vermin, clean versus filthy, you versus everything that squeaked and pooped in the corners. But now you recognize what it is. Coexistence. You don't fight anymore. You coordinate. You store grains higher. They stop chewing shoes. You let them dance in the rafters. They leave the books alone. You live not without them, but with them. You visit Agnes. She's made rat-sized cloaks. For warmth, she says, though one is definitely embroidered. Oswin's built a rat observatory, using his broken lanterns and some old jam jars. He logs their nightly movements like a squirrel-obsessed astronomer. The blacksmith leaves coins out, says the rats shine them better than any apprentice. And as for you, you've taken up sewing, really sewing, with guidance from the shadows. Little paws push your thread back into place when it drops. Little claws hold the corner of the cloth taut when you're trying to get the hem right. At night, you light a candle, whisper your to-do list aloud, and sometimes you hear a tiny sigh of approval from beneath the floorboards. It's comforting. You've stopped dreaming of escape. You've started dreaming of rooms to add, extensions to your house. Not for you. For them, you think about a rat-sized library, a warm corner with bits of parchment and tiny candles made from melted wax and leftover lard. You sketch it on your table. You leave the sketch overnight. In the morning, it's still there, but now it's annotated with paw prints and one very small drawing of what appears to be a cheese fountain. You chuckle, approve, and get to work. Later, you sit by the hearth, sipping broth that tastes of time and unspoken understanding. The fire crackles, Claudia purrs, Whiskerford snores, and just beyond the flicker of the flames, you see them, rats, moving, talking, living like neighbors, like a parallel world built of crumbs and ambition. And for the first time, you don't wonder when it will end. You just wonder how you ever thought it should. because rats may chew, but they also stay, they build, they learn, they remember, and so do you. You no longer mind the scratching. You no longer fear the night. You just tuck in your cloak, adjust the garlic braid, for nostalgia mostly, and drift off. Feeling safe, at home, exactly where you belong. And now, dear friend, the house is quiet. The hearth glows low, a warm hush across the floor. The rats have settled, some curled in hammocks of ribbon and thread, others nestled behind walls that no longer creak with worry, but sigh with soft, sleepy routine. You're under your blanket now, patched and worn but comfortingly familiar, like an old story whispered by firelight. The wind outside taps gently at the window as if asking permission to pass by. You let it. It moves along the roof, rustling straw, brushing the eaves, then floats off into the dark. There is no scratching tonight, only the hum of shared breath between two very different species who've learned, somehow, to live in tandem. You feel your heartbeat slow, your breath ease. No war to win, no broom to wield, just the slow, rhythmic beat of your pulse syncing with the distant, dreamy scurry of creatures you once feared, but now understand. The rats will handle things. They always do. And in this moment, soft, still, perfectly balanced, you are free to rest. Let your eyes close. Let the warmth hold you. You've survived more than rats. You've survived misunderstanding, discomfort, and even your own expectations. And here you are, home, safe. Still, sleep well, neighbor. You've earned it.